Hey. Oh, put the wrong sheet. I need this one. Good evening, everybody, and welcome aboard. We are getting ready for our journey 3 steps. And of course, we start off with what's going on in the calendar. From there, we go into what's going on in the Parshah. And then most importantly, we're looking for practical relevance, helpful life messages from the Parshah to set us on fire, to set us going for this week, for here and now, to be able to find more meaning in our life, and more importantly, also to be able to get ready for Geula, to be living Mashiach-dik and everything that Hashem is expecting from us. So, let's start right away with what's going on in the Yiddish calendar. What's going on in the Yiddish calendar? So, of course, we are in the middle of the 3 weeks. And we spoke about this last week, but when we are in a time of mourning, national mourning, annual historical mourning, in which we commemorate and we bring to mind things that took place 2,000 more and a bit less years ago, that's a lot of years to carry tragedy with us. And especially as Hasidic Jews, we ask ourselves the question, what's the point of carrying pain and holding on to the sadness that we brought with us for so many years? And of course, as the Rebbe tells us, the Eibush is not mean. The Eibush is not trying to make sure that we have things to be sad about. Chas v'shalom. Adarabah. The opposite. The Eibush is chesed, kindness, the ultimate kindness. And therefore the question becomes, what does Hashem want from us by giving us such hardships? And the answer has to be that this is going to bring growth like no before. But more importantly, we don't look back. We do not look backwards to the sadness, to the hardships, and equally to the excitement of history, unless it will carry us forward into the future. So as we sit and we think and we discuss the hardships and the sadness of the Churban Beis Hamikdash, the terrible destruction and the hardship that Yiddishkeit has suffered over the ages, the number one conclusion has to be, of all the sadness, of all the hardship, must be the B'chein, where is it leading us to? How does it set us up to be even better going forward? And the answer isn't so hard to find. Of course, the reason why we have the commemoration of the Churban is in order to encourage us to rebuild, because we believe that the Beis Hamikdash will come back. And that's why we keep reminding ourselves that we used to have a Beis Hamikdash. The sadness isn't an end into itself. The sadness is a catalyst. It should get us jump-started to be able to do everything we can to bring back the Beis Hamikdash, and we do. We do. There are many things that we have done today, each one of us, in order to help rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. Starting off with, if you've had lunch today or you've washed for any bread, you would have washed your hands before eating hamaitzi. And the only reason we wash our hands before eating hamaitzi is because we believe Mashiach is coming. And when Mashiach comes, the Kohanim will eat teruma once again, and they'll need to wash their hands before eating teruma. And therefore, every single Yid around the world knows or should know that they have to wash their hands before eating their own bread, because we can't wait for Mashiach to come. And we believe he's coming. And for the same reason, we remind ourselves what destroyed the Beis Hamikdash so we can know to rebuild it. And what did destroy the Beis Hamikdash? Senseless hatred. And of course, the answer to senseless hatred is unwarranted. Even when it's senseless, but tuning and sharing love and acceptance to every other Yid, even if they are not being nice. And unfortunately, there are many occasions, even in very recent Jewish history, as in the news today in Eretz Yisrael, there are many occasions where it takes enormous amount of self-control, restraint to be able to keep the focus, because it's not about making sure everyone knows who's right. It's much more important to make sure everybody's feeling connected and everyone's feeling uplifted. We're striving towards Geula, even if somebody's trying to bring us down. Another Yid needs to be felt closer and uplifted to be able to do the good things. That's generally a 3 weeks perspective, that we have a reality check about where we really came from, what it is that we're missing, and how much we can do to be able to rebuild that. That's in general the 3 weeks. But specifically this week, within 3 weeks, is going to be a week that has, number one, a double Parshah. It's Matos and Masei. So it's 2 Parshas rolled into one. Number 2, Matos Masei means we're finishing the 4th book of Bamidbar, which makes it into a Shabbos Chazak. Amazing. And number 3, not only is it a double Parshah, Shabbos Chazak, it's also Shabbos Mevorchim Chodesh Menachem Av, with it being a Shabbos that has in it enormous koyach energy. My name is Borchim Kol Yomin. From Shabbos comes the bracha for the whole future week, including Rosh Chodesh Menachem Av next week, which will be on Wednesday. This Shabbos will have the brachas to be able to fill up, recharge, top up the whole koyach that's needed for Rosh Chodesh Menachem Av to be able to ride through the waves. Maybe next week we'll talk a little bit about Aleph Menachem Av being Aharon HaKohen Yortzei Isha Chesed. But for today, let's talk for very, very quick, briefly, a little something about Matos Masei double Parsha, Shabbos Mevorchim, and Shabbos Chazak. Now, every Shabbos amongst the 3 weeks, it's important to mention this every week. We just mentioned it in passing last week. We're going to say it again, and that is that when it comes to Shabbos during the 3 weeks, there is no mourning. There is no avelos on Shabbos. And the Rebbe always teaches us this is a me'ei and a taste of what's going to happen of Yahaf Yom Melu, that the days of sadness will be transformed to become days of extra happiness. And on Shabbos, when there's no mourning within the 3 weeks, it's already a taste of that. And actually, we have to be more careful to not do anything that may look like we're behaving in a way of avelos, so that it shouldn't look like we're lessening the importance, the recovery of Shabbos, and that's in itself already a lesson. But when it comes to Shabbos Mevorchim in Chodesh, in the 3 weeks, when it comes to the Shabbos Mevorchim, the month of Tisha B'Av, that's when we have to draw in and ask ourselves, do we notice the amount of koyach, energy, the Eibush is investing in us? Are we realizing how much the Eibush is topping us up? The Eibush is giving us koyches, and we could maybe not notice. We should try and notice, because when we notice, then we are better positioned, motivated, and inspired to do more good things. Mevorchim in 3 weeks, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. And then, of course, Shabbos Chazak, where the whole Kehillah calls out, Chazak, Chazak, be strong, v'nischazek, and let us become strong with each other. That in itself is already the whole theme of strengthening one another, tying in with one another. Very importantly, is the theme of what we need to be doing during the 3 weeks. It happens to be that the Chazal tell us that the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash happened in the year after Hakel. In the year after Shemitah. The Chazal tell us that the destruction took place the year that followed Shemitah. Now, it helps for dating, but interestingly, the year that followed Shemitah is the year of Hakel, which we are in right now. And in the Sikh, the Rebbe explains that perhaps one of the reasons why Chazal don't use the terminology, it was the year of Hakel, but instead explains that it was the year that followed Shemitah, is to teach us something. And what are we learning? We're learning that Hakel is the opposite of the destruction. Hakel, when we bring Yidden together, which would have been the theme of that year had there not been the Churban, would have been the theme of the exact opposite of the Churban and the destruction. Okay? Said the Sikh, brilliant. Hakel is the opposite of destruction. What should we be focusing on then? If we are trying to undo and get to the opposite of destruction and rebuild, we should be more emphasizing and grabbing every opportunity to strengthen the concept of Hakel. And therefore, although we're already in Chodesh Tammuz, at the end of Chodesh Tammuz, which is already 10 months into the year, it's not too late to get every opportunity to gather together ourselves, our family around us, our friends, our community, strangers, and bring people together with the sole focus of encouraging one another. And encouragement should be translated not just into a feel-good factor, but an encouragement to know that when I do a mitzvah, and those around me, each one of us, when you and I do a mitzvah, it matters. And that's the idea of Hakel, to encourage ourselves. So this Shabbos, where it's a Hakel inside the 3 weeks, and it's a Shabbos Mevorchim, and it's a Chazak, v'nischazek, we should try and find opportunities where possible to strengthen ourselves in the idea of Hakeling. Hakeling means gathering people together You don't have to have a drasha. You don't have to have a shiur. You could just get together and encourage one another to continue doing the good things we're doing and to ever increase step by step. So this is a little bit what's going on this week. It's real. It's happening in our life. This is what we can be doing. And now we want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the Parshah. And as we said, this week's Parshah is a double Parshah. It's a Matos and a Masei. So let's try and summarize at least the headlines of what takes place in the two Parshas that are on this week's reading. And then we'll go back for a practical, relevant life message. Now, these two Parshas, Matos and Masei, interestingly, in a number of sichos, discuss that the name Matos comes from a staff or a stick, but Mata can also mean a tribe. Matos. And Matos here means the word Mata actually connotes something that's a steadfast, a strong stick that would be leading the Yiddish people forward. Let me just get everything on the screen here. Matos. And then Parsha starts off with saying that Hashem calls and tells Moshe, and Moshe tells us the importance of, to the tribes, he talks to us and tells us the halachas of a very particular area in halacha, the importance of people keeping their word. If a person makes a promise, an oath, a vow, he has to keep it, and the way it can be annulled in specific conditions. The word mata implies something that's steadfast, strong, unwavering, and it ties into the concept also, when a person says something, the person has to be careful to uphold that. Actually, it's very different, seemingly almost totally different, to the word Masei, which means travels, journeys. And the journeys when a person isn't stuck in one place, but it's moving from one place to a different place. And they seem to be a different sorts of concepts, and they're both equally important. A person has to have very strong values that we don't veer away from. And at the same time, that becomes the framework in which a person can safely travel, journey, grow. And Matos Masei make a very important comparison on so many different levels, the way Kabbalah explains it, the way Hasidus explains it, how Matos and Masei feed off each other. Here we go. Oh, come rein. Lost a bissel Wasser. Okay. If you want to see the screen, you come around a second. I don't bring the big screen on. Otherwise, you can just listen, okay? So that's the first step in the Parsha, is the story of the oaths, the vow, the nomen of vows. Then the Parsha continues. It's really a continuation of what started 2 weeks ago. The Parsha's Balak. And from there, continuing to last week's Parsha's Pinchas, which was the terrible tragedy where 24,000 Jewish people lost their lives to a plague that was started by the Avera of the Jewish men, which was initiated, and the strategy, the scheme of Bilam, the sorcerer, who tried to entice the Yiddish people, in which he sent the royalty amongst the Midianite girls to try and entice the people and to drag them into Avodah Zarah and Gilaros. And this is what caused a terrible outbreak amongst the Yiddish people. And the way the Torah describes it, they had no reason to start it with the Yidden. They weren't in harm's way. And they instead, in their pure hatred, they came along and did what they did. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu was commanding his Parshah Tzereres and Midyanim, go and take the Midianites to task, but don't just make him a hard time. Knock him out. Finish him off. The toxic ideas that they tried to promote was so dangerous, to pick a fight just in order to pursue hatred to the extent where they would do whatever possible to wipe out the Yidden Chas v'Shalom. Moshe Rabbeinu was commanded to take them out first. And they went to war. Shireen collects the army, sent them out to war, and they beat the Minyanim, and they come back with the spoils of the war. And Moshe Rabbeinu has a very specific amount of how he divided the spoils of the war. Half to the soldiers, and half to the Pikut HaErev, those who stayed behind to watch over the camp. And there was a tax on each division of how much would have to be given to the Leviim and to the Kohen Gadol, and they were divided exactly. Fascinatingly, the numbers are so exact that the percentages were able to be exactly fixed numbers. So instead of having to have half a cow and half a mates and whatever else, the numbers worked out exactly right. It was almost like not only was this war preordained and the success of the war, every detail to the very last detail was exactly accounted for, including how much spoils they came back from with the war and how it was divided and how much of it would have to be divided into the percentages to be given to the Goyim, which is a fascinating insight into what we sometimes take for granted or overlook, how much Hashem is involved in every step of the way. This is one idea. The end of the Parshah's Matos, we read how Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven first come to Moshe, and they say to Moshe Rabbeinu that we have enormous amount of flock, and we see here on the east bank of the Jordan River, which is the most western side of Eretz Yisrael. It's the east bank of the Jordan, it's the other side. And the Jewish people are camped there, and they are looking over the river and can see Eretz Yisrael mainland, but they have already conquered these portions of land, and they say to Moshe Rabbeinu, we want to settle the land over here and take our portion already now. And then originally, it sounded very close, very similar to what the Meraglim, the spies, had said 40 years earlier, in which they turned around to Moshe and said, we want to stay out here in the desert. We don't want to go into Eretz Yisrael. And after spending 40 years in the desert, atoning for and shedding the bad traits of not wanting to go into Eretz Yisrael, to hear people come along and say that they want to stay out of Eretz Yisrael, Moshe Rabbeinu tells them, what's going on? How could you? How could you say this? Until they explain themselves and they actually know, we are going into Eretz Yisrael. Not only that, we will be the spearheads, the front fighters, the front liners as the Yiddish people go in, and then we will only then come back to settle and to stay in this part of Eretz Yisrael because we can't wait to be in Eretz Yisrael. This Moshe Rabbeinu was very appreciative, supportive, so much so that not only did he say yes, he actually brought in more people into this concept, and Chatzi Shevet Menashe also joined in, and those 2.5 Shvatim got their portions in the outer side, in the east bank of the Jordan, and they are on condition that they would carry in. I forgot to mention that as part of the halachas that we learn in Matos is also included the halachas of Tumah, the halachas of Hagolas Kalim, kashering, and Tevilas Kalim, putting Kalim in the mikveh if it would belong to a non-Jew. Now we have also the second Parshah, Parshas Masei, which starts off describing the 42 journeys and encampments that the Yisrael camped, as listed from when they left from Mitzrayim all the way till where they are right now in the plains of Moab, outside, just across the river Yarden, outside the land of Canaan. Also in Parshas Masei, we have famously boundaries, exact demarcations of where the promised land starts, stretches to, and ends. Everything there is clearly delineated, which is fascinating to imagine that the Eretz Yisrael that we till this very day turn towards every time we daven. We say so many times in davening, Hashem should bring us back to Eretz Yisrael. That land isn't just a dream. It's not just because we were once there. It's actually clearly marked out in the Torah, in this week's Parashah, to tell us the boundaries and the borders of Eretz Yisrael. And think about it. The United States of America, where does it say the documentation of where its boundaries are? United Kingdom, where does that have? Britain, who decided where the borders are? Even Italy, Rome, who decided? The Torah tells us where Eretz Yisrael is. It's clearly demarked inside, word for word in this week's Parashah. We also have, in addition to that, inside Eretz Yisrael, we are told the mitzvah of making Orim Miklat and where they should be. We also have, by the way, this is actually fascinating, one of the proofs the Rambam brings for Mashiach in the Torah Shebechsav, describing this is a mitzvah that would have to still be fulfilled and hasn't been fulfilled yet. It's the part of a positive command to make sure to build up when Hashem extends the land. That hasn't happened yet. We have in the end of the parasha where Bnei Tzlafchad, who last week Bnei Tzlafchad managed to secure and ask Moshe Rabbeinu for a portion of Yisrael. In this week's parasha, they were told that they should marry only within their shevet, so that way they don't transfer the inheritance that they received on the father's behalf. So they had received their father's goods, but in order to make sure that it doesn't get transformed or transferred into a different shevet, Because, for example, let's say Milka, whatever, Noah would go and get married to somebody from Shevet Yehuda. So now her real estate that she owns would become as part of her family, which would now become married into the Shevet Yehuda. She would then be taken with a parcel of land that was designated for Shevet Menashe and bring it with to a newfound family. And that would mean that within the middle of the Shevet Menashe, you would have Yehuda people living there. And therefore, at least for this generation, they were asked, or they were told that they should marry within the Shevet, and they did. The Parshah tells us that the 5 girls of Tzlafchad got married. By the way, you know that there was 5 Masei right there, but there was weddings, and they got married within the Shevet by retaining the Menashe hold on their father's inheritance, and they would not pass on to another Shevet. Amazing. That's how we end up the Parshah, Chazak and Chazek, and that's our summary of what's going on in the calendar and what's going on in the Parshah. We now want to go back. Just get this slide on if we can make it work. Please, nicely. Yeah. Okay. It's catching up. It's getting there. So we have this week's Parsha is Matos, as we said, and in particular we're picking one area of the Parsha in which it will give us a practical, relevant life message, and it's this discussion of darkness. And this particular sikha is one of the many sikhas in which the Rebbe makes a big point of asking us to think about when hardships happen. And when hardships happen, I'm going to put the thing on the latch, please. When there are sad times in the Jewish calendar, unfortunately, there are people who can't wait for these times in which we remind ourselves of the darkness. And unfortunately, in Yiddishkeit, there have been many a dark time. But in Tisha B'Av, which is this time of the year, there very much has to be a message in the Parsha that helps us deal with the tragedies. We know in Tisha B'Av is the day where there was the major destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash and the second Beis Hamikdash. But actually, there are 5 major tragedies that took place on Tisha B'Av. The 5 major tragedies, the way they have listed it from the Mishnah is, first of all, way back when, was when the Meraglim came back with a bad report. Number 2 is the first Beis Hamikdash destroyed in Tisha B'Av.
Yes, with great grandpa.
Almost 500 years later, the second Beis Hamikdash was also destroyed on the same day. Then, not so much later, seeing you started the Charish, the Yerushalayim was plowed over. There shouldn't be any remains. And about 60 years later, after that, the short-lived revolt of the Bar Kokhba revolt in Beitar was destroyed. And unfortunately, the Romans came back with so much venom and so much anger. It was a very, very terrible destruction, even more so, but it was a terrible blow to the Yiddish people who had just somewhat survived the second Bechorban by the Romans. So a major tragedy. And then what we're going to ask ourselves is, if Hashem is so kind, and we know Hashem is so kind, and Hashem is toiv and tava toiv lahetiv, Hashem is good, and the nature of good is to do good. And therefore we ask ourselves the question, when it looks dark, what can we say to ourselves that should keep us going? And more importantly, without becoming naive or disillusional, is it safe to remain positive and upbeat, not after? And we're looking at history with the help of the 2020 vision of the looking back. But when a person is going through the hardships, is it safe? Is it what Eibishter wants us to do? Is to ignore the hardships and just remain positive? And if we do that, is it going against what Hashem wants us to do, to experience the hardships? And if we will experience the hardships, then how can we remain positive? And is there a way to figure out the balance? This is the question. What do we do if a person finds themselves in a terribly difficult state? And we are borrowing specifically from this week's Parsha, but the question is really connected to the time of the year that we're in. So if anyone's feeling brave, If anyone has the courage to just switch on your mic, and we're looking for ideas of how we can balance being realistic, or even from a Yiddishkeit perspective, recognizing Hashem's harshness, and at the same time, is there a way to somehow balance positivity, upliftingness, bitachon in Hashem, and goodness? So if anyone has any suggestions how this could work, now's a good time to unmute, please. Right, let me go, please. Now, this particular question has many sichas that deal with it. I think we spoke about this question a little bit a few weeks ago. But I want to start off with saying that the starting point that any idea in Chassidus is going to have in this is that there has to be a way where every single day, in the worst possible situations, there must be a way to have bitachon and be positive. There must be. So now, if that's the starting point, the question isn't, can we be positive? Can we be upbeat? The question becomes a different question. How can we make it happen? Because the Chassidus is going to tell us we must be able to make it happen. The question is only going to be how. Come down to that, please. Yeah.
If you really believe that everything that happens is from Hashem,
yes,
and that everything, then even though you sometimes think it's bad, or even if it is actually bad, then, or it's perceived as bad, then if you know it's coming from Hashem, then if you tell yourself often enough, then you can train yourself that whatever's going on, you really can believe that.
Wow. That takes a lot of courage. It takes an enormous amount of courage. But yes, you may have a very valid point. A person who has deep faith, someone who believes very deeply, will know that even though I can't explain this to myself and I can't see how this is good in any way, but it's coming from Hashem. It's coming from Hashem, and therefore it must be good, even though I don't understand. It's almost like I fight my own self. Naturally, I want to feel one way, and I use my faith to fight the other way. Very important, very strong. And of course, it's also important to remind ourselves that this sort of faith is much easier to build when there's no crisis. Meaning, if it's just a coping mechanism, I can't cope any other way. And therefore, I'm going to strengthen my emunah and bitachon and say that it must be from Hashem. That's a very difficult uphill battle. It's much harder. It's possible. And sometimes the enormousness of what's going on can become a catalyst to have strong and deeper emunah. But usually, it's much easier to build emunah and bitachon based on what we learn and recognize in the good times, and have deep seitan emunah. And hopefully with that itself should hold off any sort of hardships. But that sort of bitachon and emunah, when it's built up in the good times, holds us in good stead, chas v'shalom, even when there's a dark moment. The sikh we're about to learn asks us to take it even one step further than that. But before we do that, we're going to start off from the other way around. We're going to start off learning the sikh the way it discusses the point in the Parshah, and from there go into how it answers our question. Okay, here we go. So the question that the sikh asks is a question that's asked in many Mamorim, and it's a discussion that discusses the name of the Parshah, the opening line of the Parshah that says Elam Masei in Israel. These are the journeys of Jewish people. And the question that is asked is that the list of the journeys are mainly the places where we stopped. And the journeys imply that we're going to list the movements. And therefore the question is asked, are we looking for the movements where we're journeying from one place, but we're journeying to the next place, so the traveling? Or are we about to list the stops, the machanos? Now, does it really make such a difference? You could argue it doesn't, but Chassidus is going to tell us that the difference between the journey and the stops is like, what's the main thing? Do we go on vacation for 1 week or 5 weeks a year in order to come back and go to work, and the main thing of life is just to be work? Or do we work hard a whole year for 40 whatever weeks, so that we can eventually go and enjoy ourselves and be ourselves on vacation for the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks we go on holiday. Which one is it? And that sort of question is a question that sometimes you ask yourself and you have one answer. Sometimes you ask yourself the question with a different answer, maybe what mood I'm in. But the short of it is, welcome. The short of it is the question, what's the most important thing? The journeying, the traveling, or the stops, the encampments? Now, the question is asked on the Parshah, but it's the same question in our own life. And what we want to talk about is where does it take us? Where does it lead us to? Here's a little quote from the Sikha. It starts off here from a quote from the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. The grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, writes the following. Know that I've heard my saintly master, my grandfather, in the name of his grandfather, Baal Shem Tov himself, oh bless him, that the 42 journeys that this week's Parsha is talking about is not just a piece of Jewish history, are the life journeys of every person from the day of birth until we return our souls to our Maker. So the Baal Shem Tov, and one of the few quotes that we have from that actually quote his grandfather in a message in which he says that the 42 journeys are the 42 starts that we have from when we are born throughout our lifetime until the soul goes back to his Maker. The day we emerge from our mother's womb is an exodus of sorts, and that's the first step. We then travel from one journey to the next until we arrive to the eternal world of life and celestial spheres, and that's when we get into Eretz Yisrael. So the last journey before Eretz Yisrael is the 42nd journey. These journeys were certainly delineated in the Torah to teach us the proper path. Why do we have to have a whole list of the 42 journeys, says the Baal Shem Tov, quoted by his grandson? It's telling us so that we would know the path that we must tread all our lives from one journey to the next, and know that each journey is holy and pure. And this is what our Parshah's Masei is telling us, says the Maggid Ephraim, in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, is telling us how we should live our life journey by journey. So now the question of, are we looking for the journeys or are we looking for the encampments, becomes a little bit different. And here is where the Sikha is going to take us into a little bit of an analysis of what it means to go on a journey, what it means to be able to come to a stop, come to a station. And if that station is the station of a journey in our life, then it's ever relevant to where we're up to. So that's the metaphor. The metaphor is that the 42 journeys in the Parshah are describing the journeys in our personal life. And there are some places where it tries to describe at least some of the particular journeys, but the general concept's the same. Every time we come to a station in our life, and then we wake up with another day. We have tremendous achievements. We do. That we've achieved as youngsters, as we grew up, as that we achieved this year, that we've achieved yesterday. But then we wake up as in a new day. Now Hashem wants us to learn from this week's Parsha that it's a continuous journey. And every day we have to continue striving to go higher. And keep on growing rung by rung, ladder by step by step, even if we can't necessarily see today what it is that we're going to achieve. We don't know what tomorrow's journey is going to bring us to. Today, we live through today. It's already a concept. Every station, every one of the mem-based Masois is a Masei into itself, is a journey into itself. This is how the Baal Shem Tov, the way the Maggid Ephraim explains it, describes it to us. But it continues. It continues a little to step further. And this is actually from the Kli Yakar, which the Kli Yakar describes. It's important to notice the difference between a journey and traveling. Interesting little difference. What would you say might be a difference between a journey and a travel? Anyone?
A journey, you're getting to the destination. A travel,
yeah.
A travel is the ikka is the travel.
Oh, and we don't even notice this. We're not emphasizing that we're on the way to somewhere. We just happen to be traveling. Actually, traveling, if you just think of the idea of traveling, especially if you've got a family and you're kinderlich, it's just a headache. Oh, I'm going to have to get onto the plane. I'm going to wait in the airport. I'm going to have to go in the car. I'm going to sit for hours and it's going to be a travel. It might bring off the exact opposite idea of what journey can connote, which is we're going towards somewhere. It could be. It doesn't have to be. But in this context, the Kli Yakar wants us to think of it in those terms. The word travel is limited to the narrow act of moving one's legs, namely, which means uprooting from one location to another. I'm comfortable here. I'm set up here. I'm stationed. I have to pick myself up and throw myself into traveling. It's entirely possible, but despite moving to a new location, one maintains a psychological attachment to the previous location. I've traveled to a new place, but my mind is still somewhere else. And you know what Chassidus is going to say? Not only my mind is somewhere else, I've not let go of the comforts of the previous station. And although I might have picked myself up, I'm still wishing, I'm still living, maybe not in the past, but in the old station. I'm still living there. I haven't yet fully journeyed to a new location. By contrast, the word Masei, the journey, connotes a clean psychological break from the previous place. We've journeyed away from there. We've now become to a new reality, a new place. We're finally here. We've finally arrived to somewhere else, to a bigger, a better place. And the Chassidus will tell us that's not just that we have a destination in mind, which is important. That destination is what's filling our mind. This is where we want to be. This is where we're at, this newfound station, this newfound place, which means we've let go of the previous and allowed ourselves to grow out of and grow with the previous into something which is entirely new. Not because the previous was bad necessarily, or not because the previous wasn't good, but because we allowed ourselves to develop into something which is brand new. Psychologically break free from the old and let ourselves into new. If anyone wants to say something or weigh in on this, now's a good time to speak up. Because what we're about to do is have a little bit of exploration of what this means to us in Chassidus, in our personal life, and where it means to us in our journeys, especially now that we're in the 3 weeks with the Shabbos Mevarchim for the 9 days. And that's a metaphor for a person's own personal exiles, hardships, troubles that we need to work with and deal with. And our question we asked ourselves is, how can we remain optimistic? We know we have to be able to. And what can we tell ourselves to give ourselves the courage to do that, especially when we're noticing and we're being told to notice the hardships as well. So the Masei wording is already teaching us we never settle for yesterday's achievements. Our focus is always on moving onward to even higher and better goals. To go from strength to strength, from madrega to madrega. Not because yesterday wasn't good, because yesterday was yesterday. And today we want to give ourselves the courage to keep on growing. The reason why a person would say that to themselves is because they are very motivated. How does a person become motivated? When they believe that their life has meaning. There's something that they can achieve. The picture we have here is of a mountain. And the person who believes that they can overcome this mountain, they can reach the summit, is a motivated person who will have the courage to make their difficult trek and keep on going up. But guess what? What happened if they reach the top of that summit that you can see in the picture? And all of a sudden at the top of that summit, they will suddenly, maybe they've gone through the clouds or whatever it is, in front of them, they might notice a whole new height, which is much taller than the height they've reached already. What happens then to a motivated person? The motivated person reaches a new height and all of a sudden discovers that there's more. They gather their koiches, recharge, and the next morning they're charging forward to conquer the next summit. This is what we're talking about. Being motivated. How can a Yiddish person be motivated? We're not talking about Torah yet. Just the concept of being a motivated person is to recognize that I wasn't here 150 years ago. I wasn't here 250 years ago. I was born one day. And the day I was born is because Hashem voted me in. And I woke up this morning again because Hashem voted me in. Recognizing that the Rebbeinu Shalom didn't make me happen by chance. Recognizing that Rebbeinu Shalom has a vision for me. And I am the only one that can carry out that vision. That's motivating in and of itself. Especially if you play into that we'll talk about more, that all the factors that I have to calculate, my hardships, my drawbacks, the circumstances, all of that is part of Hashem's master plan, and none of it is despite Hashem's plan. None of it is despite Hashem's plan. Every detail that I'm taking into calculation is the very plan of Hashem. So it's not despite, that exactly is what the plan of Hashem is. So let's talk a little bit about that. Here's a quote from the Sikha. Our ancestors viewed reaching their encampment not only as an achievement, but also as a prelude to the next journey. Every time Klal Yisrael reached the summit, a station, every time they had a chanoya, a encampment, they recognized that that encampment was still in the middle of their life. They were still in the middle of the desert. And although they had reached a station, that station was a station that was the intro that would allow them to continue tomorrow on their next journey. The very fact, says the Sikha, that they would journey forth from this place made the encampment a launching point and therefore an integral part of the next journey. Every time they stopped, it was part of a journey. And therefore, even though the next journey would only begin after they had rested, the primary intention of this camp was the journey that would follow. The inner dimension of the camp was not just a place to rest, it was also a place from which to journey. So if we go back to our question about, do we go to work in order to go on holiday? Or do we go on holiday in order to come back to work? Says Yiddishkeit, the only reason why I go to work and the only reason why I go to a holiday, both of them is all only in order that I should be able to continue my vision and the mission I was born for, the calling in my life. So it's not about working in order to go on holiday or going on holiday to go to work. I go on holiday and go to work so that wherever I am or whatever I need to be doing, I am furthering the reason why I was born. So if you ask a person, what's the end goal? What's the purpose? What am I looking for? Am I looking to finally sit down and relax and say, you know what, I've made it? Says, will tell us, what does that mean? That's like a person who's no longer anywhere to grow. There's nothing to achieve. That's not life. Life is about being able to continuously make a difference. And that's why today is relevant. That's why today is important. That's why I'm relevant, because today I'm going to make a difference. Part of making a difference is resting. Part of making a difference is maybe going on a nice holiday. And part of making a difference is maybe going to get a job, or maybe you're working at home, or whatever it is. But the mission is always, always relevant. And everything about that is about the mission. And this explains why the name of the Parshah is Parshah's Masei, the Parshah of journeys. Even though the list of 42 journeys aren't actually a list of 42 journeys, they're a list of 42 stations, but every station is part of the journey. The entire stop isn't a stop. It's what they call in the language a pit stop. What's a pit stop? Pit stop is when you're going car racing and you need to quickly change the wheels and you have to continue rolling. The reason why you stop is in order to go. It's a pit stop. And that's exactly what every stop was in the journeys of the men-based Masei, which the Baal Shem Tov tells us is the story of our life. We do take stops. We must take stops. And if we ever catch ourselves skipping a stop, we should go and get somebody to tell us, you've got to look after your health. You've got to look after your gesund, your emotional health, your physical health. You've got to look after your family. But everything about that isn't a stop, it's a pit stop. Resting places are pit stops, not destinations. And therefore, the list of destinations become called the list of journeys. Because each one of them is part of a journey. It's not just traveling, it's going somewhere. And the stop is part of going somewhere, a whole new somewhere. And this is how we have to look at what we do when we do it. Now, this is the easy part of the Sikha. This is the easy part of the Sikha because it gives us a general concept. And as I said, it's mentioned in a number of Sikhas, and it comes from the concept of Masei, journeys being the name, the title for the list of encampments. Okay, easy part. Now, in the next 15 minutes, 14 minutes we have left, we want to go and explore what happens when the journeys and the stops become not just distracting, they become very challenging. What happens when the stops aren't just a break to be able to catch your breath in a pleasant holiday resort? What happens when the stops are the hardships of life? What happens when life gets in the way and forces us to stall, or we fall backwards, and that's the stop? When it's a red light, or chas v'shalom, a painful experience. How do we understand those parts of the journey that seem to be everything but moving us forward? This is where we have to dig much deeper than just saying, yes, we're always on a journey, and even when we're on holiday, and even when we're at home or at work, that's the easy bit. But when it's tough, when it's hard, when it's rough, that's when it becomes a much deeper question. And this is really where if I had to make up the Sikha, I would stop here. Because unfortunately, there are people who have real tsaros, very harsh tsaros. And to stand up and say that we need to be positive even when you have tsaros takes an enormous amount of courage to have the chutzpah to say that. But guess what? It's not chutzpah. It's honesty that I couldn't say on my own, but the Rebbe tells us this. And not just from a Sikha, the Rebbe tells us from the Parshah. And it's important to not be afraid to say it, even though it's uncomfortable. To have that chutzpah, because we said it's not chutzpah, but it feels like it. How can I turn around and say to somebody who's suffering, who's in pain, who's experiencing real tsaros, to turn around and say, but you have to be strong. Of course, chas v'shalom, we're not telling people what to do, and we're certainly, chas v'shalom, not judging anybody in any level, but we want to tell ourselves and build up the emunah and bitachon, strengthen ourselves in a generation of Geula, to tell ourselves, what do we say to ourselves and those around us? What do we say to ourselves about real hardships? And before we go into the next slide, I want to share that there in the Dvar Malchus of this week, we talk about which one of the two parshas, Parshas Matos or Parshas Masei, should carry the message of Chazak, Chazak, V'nis Chazek. Which one of those two parshas are more strengthening, are more inspiring and motivational? Matos, in which we are told that we can be strong and Hashem is with us and Hashem is giving us all the goodness, or Masei, the journeys that a person tries to make it work from the bottom up and has to continuously try and grow, and it's step by step, and it's not easy. And the Sikha helps us realize that although it would make sense to guess that when Hashem's inspiration comes and shines upon us all the goodness, that's when we will have strength, chazak, chazak, v'nis chazek. We see that the chazak, chazak doesn't come in Parshas Matos. Chazak, chazak comes in Parshas Masei. The Masei, which is the very human, finite, fragile, and unpredictable. Human effort is exactly where we find the strength. This is where Hashem tells us you will have strength and you will find more strength from each other when we're looking honestly at what's going on around us, and we're not afraid to acknowledge that we have tsaros, we don't ignore it, and at the same time we forge on. So this is the background that we're finding chazak, chazak in the Parshah of Masei. And as we just described, that Masei is journeys, and we've called red lights and stops and what we call it here, painful experiences. Those have all been called pit stops and included in the title, in the heading, journeys. How can we do that? How can we honestly not live in delusion, not be naive, and at the same time have this sort of approach? So there's a few different quotes here from other sources. We want to go and find the sikh in 1 second. Every stop, no matter how long or painful, moves your journey forward in ways you could never imagine. So the sikh is going to ask us to start off by saying, remind ourselves that we cannot measure reality based on just our own experiences. Because as we know, our experiences and our feelings change daily. And if not daily, from hour to hour. It really depends on how we feel. If somebody is smiling today as they walk past me on the street, it can literally change my mood. And it does. And reality hasn't changed. The Taurus may very well be the same exact Taurus, but it's become a little lighter. And equally, if I smile at somebody else, I can give them a much easier time and an uplift and a boost. It's not just a smile. Sometimes it's a nice word. Sometimes it's something else. So measuring by how I feel won't really give me a correct reading what's really going on. What does give me a correct reading what's going on? Says the Rebbe, and this is how the Lubavitcher Rebbe led his life, encouraged us, taught us, led us measure reality by what Torah says is really going on. And there'll be times that we won't understand how it could be possible, and we'll need to dig to find how it's right. But remind myself over and over again, if Hashem says this is what's going on, you can be 100% sure that that is what's going on. Equally, if Hashem is toiv and teva toiv lahetev, if Hashem is good and goodness does good, you can be sure that it's good what's going on. We have to dig to be able to find that out. But that's definitely what's happening. So here's one little tool that the Rebbe teaches us that helps us be able to find goodness in the situation that a person might find himself. And often it's not easy. But this is a little tool. I want to share the tool. And I want to just say a little disclaimer that I don't profess to be a professional in this. And I can't say that I'm always winning in this area, but it's something that I strive to a lot, especially when things aren't easy. And this is a little tool I want to share with you. And I hope, I'm quite confident actually that it will be workable for you. The tool is as follows. Sometimes our barometer, our measure of what goodness is based on what the Joneses have, or is based on what we grew up with as an ideal, or is based on the path of least resistance, the easiest way. There are times that it's much more than that. But what we want to emphasize is there's a new measure that is different to what most people think of. And the measure is purpose. The measure is how purposeful can I be? How much can I make a difference? It's a different measure to how comfortable I can be. It's a different measure to how much will the people I care for be comfortable, which is valuable. It's real. It's an important value. But this is different. This is a different measure. It's a measure that Torah makes a big deal out of. And it doesn't say how comfortable are my loved ones. How comfortable am I? It says, how meaningful is my life? How much purpose can I make today have? And a good day is a day that can have a lot of purpose. And a hard day is when my life loses its meaning. And that's very sad. That's really sad. And in this week's Parshah, we learn that whatever happens, come what may, we're always journeying to a more purposeful today. And although I had purpose in my life yesterday, today's journey is to find meaning in today. And if that meaning is the meaning, I want to share a quick story. True story. Happened yesterday. Had a conversation with a fellow who's trying very hard to grow in his Yiddishkeit. It so happens this particular individual, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, went from 0 to 100 in a matter of days. Very quickly started keeping mitzvahs, very quickly started doing a lot of things to the extent where he drove himself over the edge. And he had a different condition. The bottom line is it didn't last very long. And recently, he started exploring again his own Yiddishkeit, and he's found that he has to remind himself over and over again. So you have to take it step by step. And we're not saying that Yiddishkeit is less, but for right now, for today, I will do one mitzvah, and I'll focus on it. Interesting, we came together with an idea where he rewards himself for being able to hold him to a mitzvah for 3 weeks, and now I'm going to reward myself. I'm going to allow myself to take on one more mitzvah. That will be the reward. Fascinating idea. What's the reward for a mitzvah? Schar mitzvah, mitzvah. Literally, he does a mitzvah for 3 weeks. He started doing his tefillin. When he did 3 weeks of tefillin, he says, you know what? I'm going to reward myself for 3 weeks of tefillin. Went to the Jewish Book Center in Ashburn Grove, and he bought himself a kvart, and he's going to allow himself to start doing Netilas Yadayim, and he started doing Netilas Yadayim. Once he did 3 weeks in Netilas Yadayim and tefillin, he allowed himself to reward himself for the next one. Fascinating idea. Recently, he went away on a holiday. He happens to have a non-Jewish partner. And he took with his tefillin. And he said, I'm going on holiday. Maybe I can take something on. He had a discussion. We decided just holding the fort. Just holding on to his commitments that he has so far in a difficult situation where he won't be in his regular setting. And he'll be open to different whatevers. If he manages to hold on to whatever he's doing already in a difficult moment, that will gain him reward. That's already a gain, and that's a new level. It's the same mitzvah I did yesterday and the day before, but now it's a difficult challenge. If I'm able to hold my ground in a difficult challenge, that's meaning. That is meaningful already. It might be that the new neighbor that just moved in, it might be that my friends started putting peer pressure on me in a way that I wasn't challenged until now, but all of a sudden now, the things that I've been doing up until this very moment have become challenging. It might be that someone in my family needs a refuah shlema, and what was taken for granted and it was so easy for me up until this point has now become a challenge. Holding my grounds here is real journey. That's a real journey, and it's so meaningful and so deep. I've turned a stop into a journey. I found purpose in what could have been a downer, but I found this opportunity to strengthen myself and still remain connected. This is real growth. This is not just holding my ground. This is real journey, masa. It's not travel. It's not a stop, a chanaya. This is a real masa. And in this week's Parshah, we learn that the mem-based Masos, the 42 journeys, didn't actually bring them closer to Eretz Yisrael every single time. Sometimes they were just cleaning up the mess. That's also a journey. Because if journey is measured by how comfortable it is, then this is not a journey. But if the journey is measured by how meaningful I can make today, how much meaning can I find in this challenge, it's always a journey. Hashem should give us the koyach. And then first of all, the bracha that we shouldn't have to have difficult situations. But more importantly, we should find meaning in every single day of our life and celebrate the fact that we're still forging on, that we're still journeying forward. And when it comes to the 3 weeks, and then once again, we're learning about the halachas of the Beis HaMikdash in Torah. Once again, we're doing hakels because it's the time that we need to have more hakels. Once again, we're finding ways to make joy within the realms of halacha in the 3 weeks. This is new. And Hashem will give us the brachas, the hatzlacha, the simcha, the gesund, and all the other things that a person might need. The toiv hanirav hanigla, all the good things that will bring us closer and closer to the Gola until we won't need to have this anymore. We should only have the Gola mitzvah Hashem. Thank you very much for joining. Wishing everyone a wonderful week. A chazak v'nischazek, a guten chodesh for the Shabbos mevarchim, and all the other good brachas. Same time, same place next week. B'ezras Hashem.
Thank you. Thank you very much.